Today we're going to talk about the Great Commission. If you're not familiar with the Great Commission, it is found in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20, which says, "Go and therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them everything that I have commanded you, and lo, I will be with you always, even until the end of the age." This verse is really a flagship for missions in the Bible. Usually when people talk about a missions passage of the Bible, they must always go to Matthew 28, and it has been labeled for many, many years as the Great Commission. It is Jesus sending out his disciples to make disciples of all nations, Pentateuch ethne, all the ethnic groups. But before we talk about people groups or ethnic groups, and if this is a command for the disciples during Jesus' time, or if it's a command for the disciples of all time, of all Jesus' followers, we're going to talk about the beginning part of this passage today, where it says, "Go and make disciples." Maybe you've heard this before. I first heard this about 15 years ago. I was attending a church. I had pastor was a recent seminary graduate and had studied Greek, and I didn't know any Greek at that time. So I followed along with whatever he said. I didn't know any better at that time. But the thing goes like this, that the command and the imperative of the Great Commissions is not go, but make disciples. And the go part is a participle, meaning it is something in progress. So it's like saying, as you're going about your life, make disciples as you go along the way. But there's no really intentionality in this interpretation. It's really kind of a lackadaisical approach to the Great Commission. It makes it not so great. So the question we're going to ask today, is that really what it says in the text? Is the go part, is that part of the command? Or is it only just make disciples as you're going about your life? First of all, we're going to say, yes, the very main imperative of the Great Commission is make disciples. So Jesus is telling his disciples that they are to make disciples for Jesus. But we have to understand that the word go here in Greek is not a present tense participle. It does not mean as you are going. It is an aorist participle with an aorist imperative. And so you can't really separate. Doesn't mean as you are going. That would be a present tense participle. In this particular case, as with several other cases that Matthew uses in his gospel, this verb and participle combination, this aorist participle with an aorist imperative, is called an attendant circumstance. And it's where the participle is borrowing that mood of the main verb, of that main imperative verb. So therefore, that participle also has an imperative with it. It's borrowing that mood of the imperative. Other instances of this in Matthew are found in Matthew 2:8 that says, "Go and look carefully for the child." Matthew 9:13 says, "Go and learn what this means." Matthew 28:7 says, "Go quickly and tell his disciples." The main verbs in these passages are things like look, learn, tell, and it's attached with this go. In the example of Matthew 2:8, when it says go and look carefully for the child, the person can't look carefully for the child without going. Go is an implied command. It's borrowing the imperative of the main verb. Just so when we come to the Great Commission in Matthew 28, the go and make disciples, implying that making disciples requires going. It requires an intentionality to go where there are not disciples and make disciples. As Daniel Wallace says on his blog about this passage, essentially it means that the apostles and the disciples must go before they make disciples. The going is a necessary prerequisite to making disciples. So we cannot make disciples without an intentional going to them. So now, I want you to pray and see, how does God want you to go in your life to make disciples? To be intentional about leaving your place of comfort and making disciples of Jesus.